Hey, I'm Abby and welcome back to the Life Work Balance YouTube channel. Today I want to talk to you about the differences between public and private sector jobs. Before we jump into that, please go ahead and give this video a thumbs up if you're looking forward to learning the difference between the two. And if you haven't already, please go ahead and hit that subscribe button as well as the bell so that you can receive life work balance advice delivered directly to you every Sunday. So first and foremost, I want to offer this disclaimer. I am not here to tell you that you should get a government job or a public sector job over a private sector job or vice versa. And I also want it to be known that other than my own business, Life Work Balance, I have worked exclusively in public sector jobs. So I'm pretty familiar with the public sector world and not as familiar with the private sector world, just based on firsthand experience. So with those disclaimers out of the way, let's talk about the difference between the two. So in the most simplistic terms, public sector is typically government jobs, government-run entities. These organizations are typically funded by taxpayer dollars. Private sector organizations, on the other hand, are usually for profit. And while private sector organizations might receive funding through the government, they're usually not exclusively funded by taxpayer dollars. Choosing whether you want to work in the public sector or the private sector will probably be very individual to you. So I am not here to tell you that you should get a public sector job versus a private sector job or vice versa, a private sector job rather than a public sector job. Making that decision will ultimately be up to you. There are also probably going to be many factors at play that help you make the decision of whether you're going to go public sector or private sector. And just because you go public or private sector at the beginning of your career doesn't mean that you can make the switch to the other industry later on. So now that we know the basic differences between public and private sector, government versus non-government, let's talk about some of the other aspects of those types of jobs that are a little bit different between the two sectors. Let's talk about private sector first. When it comes to private sector jobs, usually the biggest difference between public and private sector is the pay. Private sector jobs can typically pay substantially more than public sector jobs. This is usually because there's not as much compensation regulation within those organizations as there are within government or public sector organizations. For example, in all of the public sector organizations I've worked for, there have been established pay plans that must be followed and adhered to across the organization in a very standardized way. In private sector organizations, pay can be based purely off of performance and is not exclusively based off of the pre-established criteria for that specific position or pay range. So the biggest difference that I see between public and private sector is the pay. Now that's usually one of the main reasons why people choose to work in the private sector over the public sector. However, picking a job and an industry purely based on the money is typically not that smart of a move. Within the private sector, there's also typically greater opportunity for career growth earlier on. As I mentioned with the pay aspect, pay has this very structured process within the public sector. Same thing typically goes for experience to move to the next level of each type of job that you are in. You have to meet specific criteria in order to move from one job to another within the public sector. However, the private sector, it's much more flexible to hop between different jobs and even different types of jobs within that organization. When it comes to private sector jobs, things also tend to happen a lot faster. Decision making can happen faster, and even the recruitment process can happen a lot faster. When it comes to public organizations, there is a lot of bureaucracy and red tape that people have to follow and manage in order to make decisions and in order to hire people. So the best example that I have is that the typical length for the recruitment process for a government job can be anywhere between 2 to 3 months, if not longer. Some organizations take more than 3 months to complete or even initiate the recruitment process. So there's a lot of bureaucracy and a lot of red tape within public organizations. Private organizations can usually crank out the recruitment process a lot faster than public organizations can. So while those might seem like great benefits to working with a private organization, public organizations and institutions have plenty of benefits to offer their employees. So while their pay may not be as competitive as private organizations, public institutions typically have greater job stability. If you're working in a government organization, unless there are major budget cuts, your job is virtually guaranteed once you have cleared the probationary period. Government jobs or public sector jobs are virtually permanent. And so it's hard to get fired and it's hard to be let go unless there are extreme governmental budget cuts going on. So while there might be higher pay in private organizations, the stability can be very appealing. And some people would rather have that stability rather than the higher rate of pay. Public organizations also tend to have more comprehensive benefits packages. So these are retirement and health benefits. This isn't saying that private organizations don't have those comprehensive packages. It's just that public organizations tend to have more stable and typically thorough benefits packages that they can offer their employees. And if you move from one public organization to another public organization, your types of benefits likely will not change drastically. Public organizations also can offer pensions and pretty substantial retirement packages. So let's just talk about retirement matching, for example. You might work for a private organization and they might match 1 or 2% of your salary to your retirement account. However, I once worked for a public organization that matched 10% of my salary to my retirement account. And I was immediately vested, which meant that I could withdraw that money right away as soon as it hit my account. Some private organizations and even some public organizations have a vesting process where you have to work at that organization for a certain period of time before you're actually allowed access to the full funds that they have deposited into your retirement account. I have not heard of private companies who contribute 10% of their employees' salaries to their retirement accounts. So while both types of organizations have comprehensive benefits packages, public organizations typically have a beefier, more substantial benefits package that they can offer their employees that can be stable over the course of the employee's entire career trajectory. When it comes to working for the public sector, there are some downsides, like all of the red tape and bureaucracy and the politics that just go into working in a political organization. Most public organizations are run by the government and are government entities, so it's just inherent to the way that those organizations are run that there is red tape, bureaucracy, and politics involved. That can make decision making slow, that can make recruitment processes long, and it can get frustrating for some people. And while there usually will always be red tape, bureaucracy, and politics involved in public sector work is very service oriented. The reason most people go into public sector work is because they enjoy the service-oriented aspect of it. Almost every single job in the public sector can be tied to serving the community. Even if you get a public sector job and you're not working directly with community members, your job is likely essential to the success of the community services that are offered throughout your community. When it comes to public sector work, it's also pretty standardized. You can expect to work probably a set number of hours each week. There might be some flexibility here and there, but it's nothing compared to the regular 60, 80 to 100 hours of work per week that you could be expected to work at a private sector job. So public sector jobs are typically a little bit more standardized, which leads to greater life-work balance. So if you're looking for a job where you can not only do great work, but also have a relatively flexible and predictable schedule, public sector work is probably for you. I also want to mention that pre-pandemic, the private sector was probably looked at as more flexible and adaptable than the public sector. Government jobs used to be all 100% in person, very little teleworking or flexible, remote, or hybrid options available. However, with the pandemic, the entire world of work had to change the way they viewed going to work and actually being productive and successful at work. And this did include the public or government sector. So government industries, agencies, and organizations have pivoted and have become more flexible and more open to remote, hybrid, and teleworking. So when it comes to making the choice to apply to public versus private sector work, my recommendation is to apply to both industries. You will likely be able to find your type of job or the type of work that you're looking to do in both areas, public sector and private sector. When it comes to finding that private sector work, you can search for the different companies that you could work for that are privately owned and operated. When it comes to finding the government or public sector work in the type of industry that you're looking for, you can look for federal jobs, you can look for state jobs, and then you can look for local government jobs, whether it's in cities or counties. So there are many opportunities available to you to be able to work in either industry, public sector or private sector. And as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, my experience, other than owning my own business, which would technically be the private sector, I have worked exclusively with the public sector. So while I am a little bit more familiar with the public sector, and it has a special place in my heart, that doesn't mean that the private sector should be written off completely. There are many benefits of working for both industries. It's really going to be up to you to do your research to determine which industry is probably the best fit for you with where you are in your life right now. So I hope you found this video helpful and informative with explaining the differences between public and private sector work. If you like this video, please go ahead and give it a thumbs up. And if you have any questions, comments, thoughts, or ideas on the differences between public and private sector work, please list them in the comments box below. I love receiving comments. I read each of them individually and I respond to them all individually as quickly as I am able. So if you do leave me a comment, please be patient, but I will get back to you as soon as I can. If you haven't already, please remember to go ahead and hit that subscribe button as well as the bell so that you can receive life-work balance advice delivered directly to you every Sunday. Thanks, and I'll see you next week.